Less cars, more humanity. We're going to be talking to 5 people who are intimately linked to this topic. We're going to be talking to Carleen Cullen. Carleen is is it executive director or is it director or founder?
Czar.
Carleen is the czar of getting people to take personal steps to fight climate change as part of Cool the Earth and Drive Clean Marin, which is an organization that organizes house parties and other social events to really help people see that there's other people that care about global warming and climate change and that there's things that can be done. It's not just, you don't have to just look to the policymakers to do, or Donald Trump to help. And we're going to be talking to Debbie Raphael. Debbie is the executive director of the San Francisco Department of the Environment, which is awesome that you came to Super Bicycle on Sunday. So we're going to be speaking to Debbie Raphael. She's the executive director of the San Francisco Department of the Environment, which oversees San Francisco's policies on fighting climate change and sustainability and all those good things.
All those good things.
We're also going to be speaking with Brian Wiedenmeier. How do you pronounce it? Wiedenmeier. Yeah. Of German stock, I assume. So Brian is the executive director of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition. So a very, very influential and important organization in San Francisco. Over 10,000 members in San Francisco.
Wow.
And have been fighting for bicycles and humanity for how long?
Since 1971.
Since 1971. We're also going to be speaking with Jenna. How do you pronounce your last name?
Famular.
Famular. So Jenna is the community outreach coordinator for MCE. And MCE, if you aren't familiar with MCE was the first community choice power. Would you call it aggregator or what? Aggregator, right?
Community choice program.
Can you call it public power?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Public power. I wrote my dissertation in thesis in history on the PG&E power controversy.
Yeah.
And
which one?
The ongoing one. No, the one that basically PG&E stopped San Francisco from having public power.
Oh, that one. Yes.
By foiling it, by having the power lines end in, I think it was 50 miles from San Francisco, and created a lot of mess in San Francisco to basically stop public power. So MCE is very cool because the MCE was the company was the organization that took legislation after the energy crisis that allowed communities to choose where they get their power from, and was originally Marin Clean Energy, but it's expanded now to cover the East Bay. So now it's MCE. They're opening a new solar facility across the bay, right?
We just, actually 2 weeks ago, we did our ribbon cutting for a 10.5 megawatt project in Richmond.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that was great.
And proud to say the new wheel is an MCE subscriber. We have 100% of our power coming from clean power.
Nice.
Deep Green Champion.
Deep Clean Champion.
Yes.
And San Francisco Clean Power, which came a little later than MCE, but is part of the same family.
Same stuff. Yes, we got to learn from their example.
Learn from MCE's example. So super cool. And then we have Dave Snyder. Dave is the executive director of the California Bicycle Coalition, which is a really important organization for advocacy in Sacramento, and has been a leader on e-bike issues for a while now. He's seen the light earlier than anyone, I can say, in the bike world, in a way, in the advocacy world. Wouldn't you say? You're a bright guy. He helped pass the California Bicycle Coalition helped pass the legislation in California that basically defined electric bikes into 3 classes, which is the gold standard legislation now that's moving across the country. And that was passed three years ago?
Yeah, just about, yeah.
3 years. He also has started many important organizations in San Francisco. So he was one of the founding members of the San Francisco Bike Coalition.
Refounding members.
Refounding members.
And I'm not that old.
Refounding members.
Oh, not that.
And
71.
he was an executive director of the... Are we on? Executive director of the San Francisco Bike Coalition. When was your stint for the...
1991 to 2002.
Long time.
Wow.
And founder of Livable City, which is a really important organization in San Francisco that works to...
Don't forget San Francisco Transit Riders Union.
And transit riders.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Don't forget Car Free Happy Hour.
Oh, yeah. Car Free Happy. So, super cool group here. So, we're going to get started right now.
Oh, yeah.
Right after, right there, right now. So, I guess the first question is, and I'll address this to Dave, why do you do what you do, and why should people care?
Wow.
Wow, yeah.
Wow.
I'm not one who thinks that technology is an important part of happiness. I don't think that we get our happiness from finding the right technology or, buying the right thing. That said, the bicycle as a technology is special. It's got to be one of the top 5 or 10 inventions ever in the world. And I say that because of its impact on, it has an incredible impact on both our personal health and our community health. It's affordable, it's gentle, it's fantastic for the community. At the same time, it's fantastic for yourself. And there's not very much in life that is so good for you that's also good for everyone else. And so knowing that and knowing how badly our transportation decisions and our political power structure put up obstacles to people using bikes just makes me mad. And I know that if we change that, we could come a long way to making everybody a heck of a lot happier. So I just want to get those obstacles out of the way of people using the bike.
That...
Yeah.
And you mentioned that it's good for you, and I think everyone here at the show is going to experience, what that... If you haven't, I mean, a lot of people here at Super Bicycle have ridden a bicycle before. A lot of them, though, haven't ridden a bicycle for a long time and are now being reintroduced to it. But I'm interested, the policy side is interesting because that's also what's good for everyone and the world. Maybe Debbie, you can speak to sort of what's the policy angle on this? Why should people be bicycling, and why is it a priority for cities to help make that happen?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Why is it a priority for cities? I think because cities are the biggest perpetrators of carbon emissions on the planet now. 70% of the emissions come from cities. So with that impact comes responsibility. And it's pretty obvious what we need to do. We need to stop polluting our atmosphere, stop putting carbon into the air. And one of the biggest areas of pollution, of carbon pollution in California, in San Francisco, in Marin County, is the transportation sector. Fully half of the emissions are coming from that one sector. So while it's wonderful and super important to green our electricity grid, and we've got to do that, we've got to get off of gasoline and diesel, or we're never going to heal the planet. And the way we get off of gasoline and diesel, number one, is to have fewer gasoline and diesel vehicles on the road. We electrify everything else. And the way we can do that is by getting people out of cars and into bicycles, because as Dave said, the beauty of that transportation choice is that it's a win-win for everyone involved. And it's cities who put us in this problem, and cities then have the policy opportunities to fix it.
Jump in. Yeah, so my organization promotes driving electric and riding electric. And I wanted to mention a couple of things. One is that we've been doing work in the GHG reduction area for 11 years, kind of small things everyone could do. And with the advent of EVs and of bicycle EVs, it's really made a radical difference. So I got my first e-bike about 4 months ago from New Wheel. And at least 3/4 of my trips now are on my e-bike, even though we also have an e-car. So, that combination is really so powerful. We in Marin County just led an advocacy group of 12 nonprofits to get our transportation agency to include greenhouse gas emissions as a criteria in future measures and future actions, which is really significant because most of the transportation agencies in the state and in the nation don't address a GHG as part of their mission and goals. So that's where policy can make a really big difference, because one of their filters now has to be, will this be an effective GHG reducing action?
So, Jenna, with MCE, is fighting global warming, but why did MCE get created? Was it about community control, or was it about helping Marin meet some sort of goals?
It was both, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the really cool thing about this type of program is you don't have to limit it to one thing. We originally got started, it was a community movement. They wanted control, they wanted renewable energy, and that's why they wanted control. But it doesn't always have to be that way. I mean, there are other programs coming up around the state, and in California, the focus has really been on renewable, but people get to choose their program focus. So MCE is currently the only program of this type that offers energy efficiency services, but Sonoma Clean Power and Lancaster Clean Power down south, they are focusing on electrification of the transportation sector. So Sonoma Clean Power offers, rebates for individuals to get cars, and Lancaster is just a small community. It's one city that program serves. And because of that, they're able to really focus on their transportation really heavily by including, workplace charging and doing electric buses and all of these types of things, offering better public transit so that people don't have to get their cars on the road. So we got started to reduce carbon emissions from electricity sources, but since then the mission for MCE and also around the state has grown.
And does that include electric vehicle and electric bicycle rebates, potentially?
Well, at this time, we have an electric vehicle program that we're going to be launching in the next couple months that is focusing firstly on workplace charging. Because one of the biggest barriers to people driving electric vehicles is that they're like, well, I don't want to pay thousands of dollars to install charging equipment in my home, and I have a long commute and whatever, and I can't charge my car sufficiently. So having end-place, workplace charging is one of the biggest things, creating an infrastructure there so that people can actually drive and charge their vehicles. So that's step one. And then we're also working, step two will be to get multifamily homes, multifamily properties involved in charging stations, and then rebates for low-income customers, because they're often those that are most impacted by climate change issues, and they have fewer resources to get access to these products, which are generally expensive.
Will that include other electric vehicles besides cars? Do you think?
I don't know.
So we got to talk about that.
I mean, it's something that we know in Marin County specifically. There's a big movement towards e-bikes, but it's not necessarily feasible everywhere. And it would be really great if it was. Electric bicycles could solve the first and last mile, public transportation dilemma. They can, if you live in the community where you work, you can have access there. There's a lot of benefits to it, but it's not the way that the Bay Area currently functions. So we're trying to meet one step, and then hopefully, we're not the end all be all, but let's help, let's get there.
Great question. I think one of the issues I've been working with a lot of folks at MCE and our Transportation Authority in Marin and at PG&E. And one of the barriers to overcome is that they think that bicycling is just for recreation. And, you can go on the mountain, you can go for fun, but they don't understand the capacity of e-bikes to really make this a commute alternative, a transportation alternative. And so it's going to take some resetting of their understanding of what these bikes can do. All bikes for that matter, but really the new world with e-bikes. But that's a really big policy change, and it takes thinking at the top to consider the possibilities.
So on that topic, I'm curious, Brian.
Yeah.
Do you think on the policy side, on the political leadership side, there's a lot of talking about global warming, and there's a lot of talking about, Vision Zero, which if you're not familiar with Vision Zero, it's the idea that people shouldn't die walking across the street or shouldn't die biking because it's just not acceptable for people to die on the streets in San Francisco or anywhere. So there's a lot of talking about it, but sometimes it feels just that. It's just, there's a lot of talking, but the action isn't always matches it. How do you see that?
Well, I think we've been talking now, all the speakers have highlighted a vast array of big problems, right? Whether it's climate, whether it's personal health or community health and wellness, whether it's affordability. We all believe, I think, that the bike can be this beautiful machine that's designed to answer and solve all those problems, as Dave said, both personally, it has a benefit, but also for the community. So we recognize there are big problems, and I think most of us would also recognize and admit that those big problems have big and complex solutions. The bike can be the key that unlocks that, but it's going to take a lot to get there. And when we talk about reducing barriers to biking, you brought up Vision Zero in San Francisco. That's 0 injuries and fatalities on the road by 2024 for people walking, biking, and driving. So safety's one of those big goals. We can talk about San Francisco's amazing sustainability goals, 0, 80, 100. If you don't know that, I'll let Debbie talk more about that, but the 80 is 80% of all trips taken by a mode other than private transit. So it's easier to sign on to a big goal, right? That sounds good, and especially if you're running for elected office, it's good to have that on your platform. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of making those visions become reality, it involves things like big infrastructure projects. So one of the things we do at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition in order to fulfill our mission is to fight for more and better bike facilities, and that means protected bike lanes. And as we've seen the growth in protected bike lanes across our city, there are difficult trade-offs that neighborhoods and communities need to make. And so that's where the political leadership gets tested, because it's easy to say, I support Vision Zero, of course I sign on to our climate goals, but when it comes down to removing a parking spot on somebody's block, you're going to be really tested as a leader and an elected official. And so our job as a membership-based advocacy organization is to hold those folks accountable when they make those promises. So that when they start backtracking on removing some street parking to put in a protected bike lane, we can come and say, well, hold on a second, you said, remember when, and hold folks accountable. And I think, in San Francisco, we're lucky in some ways, and in the Bay Area, we're no longer having the conversation about why, right? Everybody's pretty much on the same page about why this is important. We are now deeply focused on how.
And can I add to that, too, just knowing Brian's job and the importance of the work that advocacy organizations do in their communities? It's hard to expect a politician to hold true to what they would like to do in terms of taking out a parking in front of a bunch of businesses if almost everything they're hearing is complaints about that. Their job is to represent their constituents. And so Brian's job, it's not even just to hold the politician accountable directly, but it's to make it easier for that politician by showing the huge amount of support for this kind of stuff. And Brian's organization, my organization, Jim Elias's and Marin County Bicycle Organizations, we don't have enough resources to do that as well as we should. It takes a lot of money to get hundreds and thousands of people to turn out to this meeting next week and in a totally different meeting in a totally different neighborhood the following week. And so everyone listening to this, I encourage you, if you can afford to buy one of these e-bikes, you can afford a couple $100 to your local bicycle advocacy organization and throw in Cowbike while you're at it, because our job is to make it easier for them to be successful.
As a government person, I really want to emphasize the importance of showing up. The world is truly run by those who show up. And so as a person who works inside government, where I report to elected officials, it's very important to me that I have people showing up so that the government people who are in support don't look extreme. We look like we're representing a lot of other people as well. So the real power happens when you have people inside government like you do in Marin and San Francisco and the East Bay, and really effective advocacy organizations. And the third arm of that is the business community. We really need the business community, whether you sell bikes or you have something in you that is supportive of a bicycle, as a business to say, we support giving up parking. We support moving resources in this direction because we care about our community and we're going to show up as well. So it is those three forces together where you get the most significant change.
And it's good for our bottom line, too. When we talk to businesses about why they support better biking, yes, they care about the climate, they care about their community health, but they want to be competitive in this marketplace. And if you want to be competitive and recruit and retain the best and brightest, you got to share that. You got to show you care about biking.
I've always been somewhat kind of surprised that, especially in like San Francisco, there's a lot of innovative thinking people, and yet it sometimes feels like we're a little bit behind the curve on some of these trends that are happening around the world as far as human scale. And especially we have issues of affordability in housing and all of this other thing, which is a huge transportation issue. And a lot of our public space is taken up by vehicles that take up you could live in the space of two cars in a way. I mean, it's an exaggeration a little bit in terms of just turning streets over to cars, but do you see, Debbie, in city government, are people thinking big about how things can change, or seeing it as maybe even a campaign plank that they want to like make bold, just like Bernie Sanders, in the campaign, he made very bold ideas public that people hadn't heard for a while, and then people said, wait, this is a good idea, everyone having healthcare. How does that happen on the political side?
Well, I think on the political side, there is hope, and whether it's bold, giant things, there's a lot of difference of opinion. I like to say in San Francisco, we don't have NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We have NGIs, non-governmental individuals, because everyone comes and has their very, very intense belief. So to me, and this is something Brian was talking about, what do you say versus what do you do? And I think the clue as to direction is the intentionality with which government and activists are working together. So one of my favorite examples of that is Market Street in San Francisco. So Market Street, when they did a survey of the traffic on the Market Street, there were 5 cars to every bicycle during rush hour. After the Bicycle Coalition, the Municipal Transportation Authority, the Planning Department, Public Works got together and with intentionality tried to solve for Market Street, where they got permission from the federal government to paint the streets. It turns out that's illegal for local governments to do. When they started banning certain kinds of vehicles, private cars, it is now transformed. Instead of 5 cars to every bicycle, there are 5 bicycles to every car during rush hour. So that's an example where you can take a bold idea and make it happen. And it may not be all across the city, but we're proving by concept what's possible, so that Golden Gate Park, so that Geary, so that the other big transportation elements in San Francisco can have that same transformation as well. And I would just like to say that, Brett, you're right, that in some ways San Francisco is slow to adopt. And so we're always looking beyond our borders for the best ideas. What is going on in Brazil? What is going on in Mexico City? What is going on in Europe? And what can we take from them to try out? And I'd just be super interested in Brian's response to what I just said.
Well, you brought up models outside the United States, so that took I was with you and going to talk about Market Street, and then my brain went to a completely different direction, thinking about other communities where we see, and Brett knows this, where we see the share of trips taken by bike, much higher rates than here in the United States. And in European communities in Northern Europe, one of the things you see is a proliferation of e-assist bikes. So I'm really happy to be here at Super Bicycle Festival in a crowd that is talking, thinking, trying out e-bikes, because I think they've reduced so many different barriers. So just one quick plug on that.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, back to Market Street real quick. It is a bold idea. It's funny, 5 or 6 years ago, painting Market Street green and red was a bold idea. And now it's nowhere near bold enough. I think it's amazing to me how quickly we've crossed that threshold, and how we are now setting our sights on a project called Better Market Street, which is going to be expensive and it's going to cost a lot of time and effort and energy, but would feature physically raised, protected, separated bike lanes the entire length of Market Street from the Ferry Building to Octavia Boulevard, where the 101 touches down. And it can't happen soon enough, but it's not going to happen because there's so many different stakeholders along Market Street. If people who care about safe, green, healthy transportation don't show up and raise their voice collectively. So if you want to talk more about Better Market Street after this panel, come find me and I'll plug you in.
So, I'm going to say something that most of you on this panel will really hate.
Oh, good.
But get ready. Really, before the e-bike, okay, there's bicycles. I stopped biking 4 years ago. I had 5 knee surgeries. I'm like, yeah, that's nice. That's for bike people. And with the e-bike, I really see it as just this radical game changer. And I think that, so the first part you hate, the second part you probably like. But I really do view it as, and I know everybody who we've been able to talk to, immediately Brett comes to all of our events with e-bikes, and we're promoting e-bikes and e-cars and, this really new form of transportation. But I think getting elected officials, we always say butts in seats, but getting them, butts on the, seat also, the saddle, is so essential to making this transition happen rapidly. Because once you're on an e-bike, I live in Greenbrae, I go up this big hill, and because I don't want to take Sir Francis Drake. It feels dangerous, and it's a horrible experience. But I go up, a side street, that's big hill that I would never take before. And I think starting with our supervisors and our elected officials in Marin, if we could do a campaign to get them to test ride a bike and test drive an e-car and get them really engaged in it to see the promise, because I think there is that perception that bikes are only for this small sliver, and e-bikes takes the other, whatever it is, 50%, and says, no, it's actually for everybody. So I would love to work with anybody on doing a campaign like that.
I don't hate anything that you said, for the record.
I just want to make a quick announcement. If there is an Eli Schaefer Alexander in the audience, Eli Schaefer Alexander, please come up to the stage here. Thank you. Sorry about that. Back to the topic at hand. So I guess it is, I think the question of how this, because the people, we've seen growth astronomical, and the types of people that come in, like that's what's so inspiring to us. Like most bike shops, when someone comes in the front door, there's a little bit of typecasting that goes on. Like you look at them and like, you're in a road bike shop, you look at the person and like, is this a customer potentially? And I think that's such a shame. With an e-bike shop, it's a totally different experience, and that's just a show of the grown constituency. Do you think, Dave, you've been working on the state level, talking to people. Do you think this concept of that there is a bigger constituency, or that even, just because there isn't someone that's ridden an electric bike yet, if a political leader seems like if they know, what, once they do ride it, they're gonna be a cyclist again? Is that percolating, would you say?
It's amazing, actually, what e-bikes have done to the political calculations that leaders think. Getting them on one, for one thing, and we've hosted several demos in Sacramento. That changes their perspective. They're all like, "Oh my God, this is easy and fun." But the other fact is that they've always thought of bicycles as useful for very short trips. And all of the policy goals that are trying to reduce vehicle miles traveled have never really seriously addressed bicycles because they figure, well, we can replace a car trip with a bike trip, but that's a 2-mile trip. 4 miles round trip, that's not nearly as good as replacing a gas car with an electric car that's going to go 40 or 80 miles in a day. E-bikes have changed that. With e-bikes, they think we can replace 10-mile trips, 10-mile one-way work trips, and in that manner, reach most of people's trips, and maybe that is worth subsidy. Maybe that is worth some policy attention. And so we're finally getting traction with purchase incentives and with electric bike share in Sacramento, thanks to e-bikes that we never got with regular bikes.
That's my question.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I want to come back to the electric purchase incentives.
I know you do.
And I also...
I do too.
Because, but Dave's actually working on this in a big way. So that's... California Bike Coalition has been outstanding on this topic. But I also just want to make a plug for... We've in our personal experience here in Marin, we have experience in San Francisco and Marin, which has been very interesting, seeing differences. But that sort of little bit narrow-minded idea of electric bikes has really shown up in a big way with a discussion about the Richmond Bridge bike lane, which is connecting the Bay Area in a way and connecting Marin with the rest of the Bay Area via BART. Never was possible before. That bridge was designed, the bridge bike lane was designed initially just as a recreational idea. And it's now being discussed about ditching the whole idea of a bike lane during commute hours so that you can have more cars going through there. Which is interesting because this shows the limits at this moment of the understanding that, you said 10 miles. The distance from downtown San Rafael to Richmond BART station is less than that. So there's something, it's been a really interesting discussion. I don't know if anyone can speak to that, the topic of how behind the curve are we on the political side, would you say?
Well, I just think that there's been a lot of conversation about changing the way that people view e-bikes, which I think is really valid and obviously has to happen. And I think it has to happen in other sectors as well in terms of electric vehicles and things like that. But there's also an equity issue around e-bikes, which is they're expensive and they're for people who have shorter commutes. I'm hearing 10 miles. You could do 20 miles, but can somebody really feasibly do a 40-mile or an 80-mile commute on an e-bike? And that's one of the issues is there's so many people who live in East Bay who are commuting into San Francisco or commuting into Marin that don't have this as an option. And it could be because their commute is so long. I'm an example of that. I commuted into San Rafael from Walnut Creek for 2 years. That's 80 miles a day. Still, I've moved, but my commute is still 20 miles a day. So can I do that on an e-bike? Probably. But do I have the infrastructure there that's available to me? Do I live in a community that's willing to invest that kind of money? Do I have the money individually to purchase one of these types of vehicles? I think that there's a lot of complicated issues that goes into it, and I don't think I ever hear anybody say I would rather drive to work than take a bike. I would for sure rather ride a bicycle to work. I get my workout in. I don't have any carbon emissions. I get to be outside. There's so many more benefits to it, but there's that issue of kind of income inequality and the way that the Bay Area is structured that makes it difficult. So e-bikes, I think they can also be thought of as that first and last mile transportation solution where maybe it's 5 or 10 miles to get you to the bus that's going to get you to BART. That's it's an interconnection issue.
It's like a horse before the cart issue sometimes.
Yeah.
Can I respond really quick to Jenna on the equity angle? I hear you, and we've been talking. We are living in the age of the super commute, right? Especially in the Bay Area, as the price of housing has pushed people further and further out. One thing we have been working on that I'm really proud of at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, and that we haven't talked about on this panel yet, is electric assist bike share. And Jump Bike and Ford Go Bike systems in San Francisco both now, Jump is a e-assist fleet. Their entire fleet of stationless bikes have electric motors on them, and Ford Go Bike is now piloting and has launched their Ford Go Bike Plus e-assist. Both of those companies have low-income household memberships. So for the first year for $5, if you can demonstrate need, you can have unlimited rides on e-assist bikes as part of bike share, either through Ford Go Bike or through Jump. And that was really important. So when you're talking about first mile, last mile, we fight for things like free Muni. We're engaged in that discussion with e-bike share as well. So, and that doesn't solve maybe the Walnut Creek problem, but maybe getting to Walnut Creek BART would be easier on an e-bike if there was an e-assist bike share option.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. So I just want to make sure, though, that we're not making policy decisions based up thinking that this is a static market, because battery technology for e-bikes and EVs, the prices are dropping so dramatically. There's been a 73% drop in battery prices over 6 years. So while these, Tesla came in at $100,000 for the same range, now you can get a Bolt at $35,000 only 6 years later. The same thing we should anticipate when we're looking at policy and rebates to be happening in this world also. So I think that's really important that we don't set policy for where we are right now, because that's going to change.
And one of my biggest bugaboos in the policy world are what I call false dichotomies, where you have to choose either or, and the answer is and. So when I hear that, e-bikes don't solve everything, that's not the point. They don't need to solve everything. They need to solve for a gap that we have now, that we understand there's a technology that can help. And so for me, the fact that an e-bike doesn't solve the Walnut Creek commute, I'm not expecting it to. Yeah. But the fact that an e-bike can get somebody like me on a bicycle who wouldn't otherwise be on a bicycle because I don't want to work up a sweat in my work clothes and I don't want to take the time to carry work clothes with me, I think that is the most exciting thing. I think from the equity standpoint, Brett, one of the things you brought up, and I'm really glad Dave is working on this, is this idea of rebates. The electric vehicle market, we understood that we weren't going to get adoption of electric vehicles without some assist from government. And so now there are tremendous rebates for that. Well, why not for e-bikes? And San Francisco we just got a grant to do a study of gender impacts on bicycle transportation in San Francisco, because when we think about transportation and what are the barriers are, traditionally we've thought about it more culturally. Why aren't people in the Mission District riding their bikes, or people in Bayview? How do we get the people in different neighborhoods to? But we haven't thought about it in terms of what are the biggest barriers for women in terms of bicycle riding in San Francisco. And if it turns out that the data are showing that the barriers are hills, clothing, whatever, safety, then that gives us a great argument to start looking at how do we breach those barriers with incentives to try and get more people onto e-bikes.
So on the topic of incentives, I want to go back to Dave, because you've been working on some projects on that in Sacramento.
Yeah, sure. There's 2 projects that we're working on, and Brian, you'll be glad to hear that one of them is a significant subsidy for e-bike share, electric bike share. The Air Resources Board has had for a while a program where you could have electric bike share as part of a car share program, but now they're going to change that and allow it to be standalone. And we'll be able to spread electric bike share all over the state. It's going to be fantastic. The other thing that we're working on is a purchase incentive program targeted mostly to low-income individuals through a community organization that will provide somewhere modeled on the San Gabriel program, $700 voucher.
Can you speak to that? What that program was?
Well, it's in progress right now. 2 years ago when we started this, there was no model in California. We had to look to Europe. There were some models from a while ago, but just recently in the San Gabriel Valley, as a program of the LA Metro, they have had bike share incentives for electric bikes to get to the metro station. And They started off at $350, and they didn't have enough uptake, and they upped it to $700, and they sold out of their vouchers pretty quickly.
Is the money coming from cap and trade? Where's the budget coming from this?
Not for that. The money for our proposal is coming from cap and trade. Yeah,
From the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think
Yeah. Great.
it does seem. We tell people all the time. It does. It's a mixture of a number of different things. If the value is there, the price of an e-bike is actually not that high. If the value's there, if you're going to use it on the weekends, obviously that doesn't make any. Then it's more of a toy. But if the value is there, you can use it every day. Then it totally saves you money. But so there's that side of it. You have to make the value there, and that's we were arguing with the Richmond bike lane thing. If you do it as a pilot program, or you close it during commute hours, then you're going to guarantee that the value. Those people aren't going to even ride when it is open because they're not going to buy an e-bike so that they can potentially have it closed off 3 years on. So you have to give people some time horizon. But the other side of it is you can make the value. You can make the value a little lower by incentives. And you can also with the bike share. I think that's a really interesting topic because that makes it so that people can try this and really see how it fits in their life with a really low commitment level. You're not marrying the thing.
Yeah, I know we're in front of a Marin audience, but if you haven't been to San Francisco in a couple of months, the streets are changing in terms of the types of bikes you are seeing people ride and the types of ways people are getting around. And e-assist bike share has really exploded in the past 6 months.
Can I ask a question? So in New York City, where I used to live for a couple decades, e-bikes are kind of a real nightmare. And I'm wondering, they're causing lots of trouble. I don't even think they're pedal assist necessarily. I'm not sure. But I'm wondering how to avoid that. That's its sort of problem because they're not well looked upon, which is a real shame. And I'm wondering what we can do here.
Yeah, so New York is a little special, and I know a little bit about this. In Manhattan, there is a lot of delivery activity.
Yeah.
And so e-assist or electric bikes are being used by delivery folks. So whether they're delivering food, purchases, whatever, there are thousands of people on delivery e-bikes. And I think that's allowed the vehicle to be put in a little niche and have its own little stigma and label attached to it. That these are the kinds of bikes that people who are making deliveries use. And that's a slight cultural difference I think is specific to New York, where what I have seen in San Francisco is, yes, I see people with caviar bags and Postmates bags and other delivery services, contract workers using e-bikes, but it is also, I see just as many families with children on e-cargo bikes.
And I think the other thing in New York is that those bikes are not pedal assist for the most part. A lot of them are retrofit systems, and when you're being paid by the piece, and when you're riding a non-pedal assist e-bike, you're naturally going to take some more risks and be a bit more of a nuisance than if you're on a pedal assist electric bike not getting paid by the piece. In New York, they are on the verge of legalizing e-bikes finally after all this time, as long as they're pedal assist. The non-pedal assist will remain illegal in New York for the time being.
Yeah, I just think as we grow in this market to how to kind of divert that so we don't end up with that problem in our major cities. And I don't know exactly how. It's beyond what I do, but we definitely are aware of very different culture here and in the San Francisco versus New York City.
I'm surprised no one's brought up e-scooters yet.
Oh no, we were interviewed last night and that was the lead-in image was an e-scooter and the controversy around e-scooters. I think that's interesting. What's the thought on has everyone on the panel familiar with the e-scooter controversy in San Francisco? No. Okay. Well, just to fill and maybe the audience, has the audience heard about this e-scooter controversy?
So Brett, the same in New York City. It's the same thing. The e-scooters face the same thing as the delivery bike.
Yeah.
If you're riding on the sidewalk with the throttle and you're using people as pylons, it's not cool.
Yeah.
So and I see it happening in the city somewhat.
Yeah.
In San Francisco,
And on the electric bikes, the new electric bike shares, they get a little crazy too.
Yeah, and just to give context for those who don't know, the e-scooter thing, it's a mixture of things that's causing controversy. One is it's sort of emblematic of like a tech takeover sort of thing going on in San Francisco. It's just they basically 2 or 3 tech companies, with lots of startup funds, got a lot of money to launch bike share all of a sudden. So they go from 0 to thousands all of a sudden, and then there's some people, they're left around on the sidewalks and stuff. So it has been, this is kind of indicative of this, policy not getting, either business getting too far ahead or policy not being ahead in the first place, or the lack of cooperation. I don't know. What does the panel think?
I want to give Dave and CalBike a little bit of credit here, because I think this is an example actually of California vehicle code being ahead of this with electrically motorized boards, and I know that's something you guys weighed in on.
Well, and right now, technically, those scooters are legally classified as scooters, which means you need a license and a helmet, or at least a helmet. And so everyone riding one of those scooters right now without a helmet is in violation of the law. There's a bill. There's a bill in the legislature to classify those electric scooters, the stand-up kind with the throttle, in the same exact way that electric bikes are classified, and we don't like that bill as currently written, and we're gonna try to get it amended. We have in this category at least a lot of clout, and I think we can succeed. I wish we had as much clout in directing billions more dollars to bike infrastructure. We're working on that. But with regards to the vehicle code stuff, we have enough clout that we can stop this bill as it's currently written, and at least limit the speed to 15 miles per hour instead of 20. And I'm open to more suggestions on what we can do to make it possible to use these scooters. I think they're a good option for people. I just don't want them to be as good an option as a bicycle.
Why?
Because they're not as healthy and they're not as safe. And I don't have the data on the safe part, but I have a reason to believe that, and there's plenty of data on the health part. Plus, I honestly think that if you want to go up Sir Francis Drake, because you have an e-bike, you're taking an alternate route. I'm sorry, I forget your name.
Carleen, yeah.
There are businesses on Sir Francis Drake. There are homes on Sir Francis Drake. Sir Francis Drake needs to have a protected bike lane so that you can use it even without an e-bike. And if all of the options allow people to get off of those streets and use electricity to go on the side streets, we're not going to have the political constituency to get that protected bike lane on Sir Francis Drake. So we need that constituency. It's hardcore politics. That's what we do.
So I have to say, I don't know that much about the e-scooters. I mean, I've read about them. I've seen them in Santa Monica and in San Francisco, et cetera. But my sole focus is GHG reduction. And we need to have policy and take steps to make sure things are done in somewhat sorry, of a way that benefits all of society. Obviously, there is a desire for these e-boards, and I would to me, if we can get people out of driving internal combustion engines, no matter what it is, the downside of there's some e-scooters hanging around, and they seem to be for like the tech companies, versus sea level rise and everything else that's coming as part of climate change. I'm willing to take, if you look at it and you think, gosh, internal combustion engine, if that wasn't around today and someone provided this information to us, like we could dig the stuff up out of the ground, we could combust it, it would cause us cancer, it would cause, climate change for all of our kids, you'd say no way. And I think, electric scooters, okay, e-bikes, great. There's some downsides, but I hope that, my goal is just always looking at the GHG benefits and hoping that we can have open policy.
Maybe one final thought on e-scooters. I think, from the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition's point of view, we are supportive of the permitting process that the city eventually adopted. I think there should be some reasonable cooperation between the companies and local government. I agree with you. I think more options to get people out of private autos, the better. E-scooters don't belong on sidewalks, so we've also been working with our friends at Walk SF to make sure there's education and that seniors and people with disabilities have the ability to move safely where they need to get to go. Mm-hmm. My one bit of hesitation with e-assist scooters is the durability and the longevity of them as hardware, actually. They feel a little disposable to me. So actually, from a sustainability point of view, the equipment that's on the street of San Francisco, I've read something like the lifespan of one of those is about 2 months. And so I have a little bit of pause. We have some beautiful e-bikes here that are built to last for years and years and years, and they're going to be with a family for a long time. I would just want to make sure that that piece of equipment and the lithium-ion battery and everything that goes with it, and the resources we're putting into manufacturing and distributing and collecting those things, because they're picked up by cars at night and redistributed, that's also being taken into account when we think about the sustainability angle.
That's interesting. Actually, an interesting topic in all this, actually, because I'm curious. In electric cars, there's not necessarily, with the incentives, there's not a litmus test. I guess you have to be approved to be able to drive on the street. You're not going to be able to get an incentive to buy a car, right? You can't, just because you go to China and buy like a little golf cart doesn't mean you get an incentive.
Right. You need a VIN.
Yeah.
That's authorized, yeah.
So you have, but there's a lot in the personal transportation world, and bicycles, even just bicycles actually. It's kind of in our experience on the business side, and we see how much of an actual free-for-all it is. There's not the regulatory framework. There's not there's some of it actually with e-bikes more because of the classification that California Bike Coalition helped put through, but there isn't as much, this is quality, this is legit, and this is not. You can build a high-speed electric bike today that has cable-actuated disc brakes that go out of adjustment within 100 miles. So you can go 28 miles an hour and have a bike that can't actually stop you properly. Is that, in this next phase where we're giving incentives, perhaps, is that in the calculation of like how we think about what bikes we incentivize and whether those are built to last and whether they actually have? Because if a throwaway item, there's a lot of greenwashing in this world, and the throwaway item is definitely, even if the production takes a lot of greenhouse emissions.
Looking at the full life cycle impacts of whether it's a new vehicle using your old vehicle for longer, the scooters. We hear those anecdotes about how long-lived the scooters are, but we don't have actual data on which to base an informed policy. So when we're advising the Board of Supervisors about a regulatory framework for these vehicles, it's really with this, what we call a producer responsibility model, where it needs to be the financial responsibility of the company putting them out there to take them back and to recycle and reuse, so that you build in a financial incentive for longevity. And if that is externalized onto society, then you're never going to get the output that you want. And this is a classic case of the tragedy of the commons. This is not unique to personalized transportation. But these issues of looking at the full life cycle impacts, I think, are critically important. And your comment that San Francisco seems to be a little bit behind, in a way, we're a victim of our own ingenuity in that we are often the first place where things get tried out and dumped. And our elected officials and our regulators are all, wake up one morning to find 2 companies worth of scooters, scattered around. The state doesn't give us guidance yet. And in fact, the state sometimes gets in our way and preempts us from regulating. So it's a very challenging environment right now. A lot of problems and a lot of opportunities.
But it sounds like, does the Department of the Environment, it's considering these topics, though, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah. All these things, true life cycle. We don't want greenwashing. We don't want BS. To Carleen's point, we have to take care of our climate. We have to take care of our greenhouse gas emissions. So the more we can electrify, the better, but it can't come with unintended consequences.
Yeah, so the Union of Concerned Scientists, I don't know if you guys have seen this, they've done this really detailed analysis, cradle-to-grave analysis of electric vehicles and compared to driving your current gas car. Really from extraction and refining and transportation of the oil and then the combustion and the after effects, et cetera, compared to electric vehicles. But it'd be interesting to get something like that done for e-bikes, even just the lithium-ion battery part, because then you could really have a very compelling, I don't think there's any data out there just yet, I'm not aware of it, but it'd be very compelling. They just did an update for EVs. It would be interesting to have them do an update, something for an e-bike, even if it's just 1 or 2 bikes.
And Brett, I'm going to put this back on you and the New Wheel a little bit. I think this is the role of a bike shop like New Wheel and in a certain extent advocates and community groups like us, the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, is to educate folks on what is the difference between these wonderful bikes that you have here and some of the other bikes you may see out on the street.
Oh, we try, Brian. We try. But, at the end of the day, that is a constant challenge. It's much better. We could look, I'd be interested to talk, to definitely you, Debbie, about, in Europe, they're already doing a lot of thinking about this. You couldn't produce a lot of the speed electric bikes that are on the market here because they have to be type approved in Europe. So every component has to be actually approved for use on a high-speed electric bike, which is very onerous on the companies, but at the same time, it makes it so you can't just put junk out there. But, and then we also live in, an age, we're very connected with China. It's very easy to go start a e-bike company and bring in a container full of bikes and sell them on Indiegogo. And those bikes do not end up well, I can tell you that. But anyway, we're getting close to the end of our discussion, but we do want to open it up to questions from the audience. I first want to just make a plug for lunch service. So once we're done here, lunch service has begun. It began at 11:30. So there's delicious food from Sweetwater's Cafe. Sweetwater Music Hall in Mill Valley is doing all the food. They have a really great menu. And beer service has begun too. So cool down with a Lagunitas beer, and all the proceeds go to bicycle advocacy. So I want to open it up to the audience. Are any questions you have for our esteemed panel about e-bike policy, about the future of transportation, about what their vision is for the future? Yes?
Thank you everybody on the panel, and especially a thank you to Dave Snyder for getting retail bike protected bike lanes by law had to be defined by Caltrans, and they were in December of 2015. Marin County, Santa Fe is now putting in its very first ever protected bike lane, a 1-week trial.
Oh my gosh.
On an area on Tamalpais, right through downtown, north-south greenway that we've been working on for 10 years.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
So thanks to Dave Snyder's work, California defined the protected bike lane, and Marin County, thanks to Santa Fe, is just about to see its first ever protected bike lane installed. It's a 1-week trial. I need everybody here to try it out on Tamalpais and Santa Fe and tweet that public support, email that public support, text that public support to the Santa Fe City Council. And
To the City
I've got
Council.
the info here.
Congratulations to you. All we did is put it in the design manual to make it easy for cities to do that. It's work that you've done to make it happen on that street. So congrats to you.
My husband and I took our e-bikes up to Novato High School yesterday for a high school lacrosse game of our kids, and we took this path yesterday. So it was awesome. Thank you.
About to get
Is that her
better.
name? Yeah.
Thank you. Question?
I've seen designs for what's that? Oh, for enclosed bicycle paths that have air blowing behind the cyclist. So it's a form of electric assist, shall we say, that allows long distance, weather controlled transit, and apparently some of these are starting to be developed. I think the company Richard Branson's Virgin is behind some of this. Anyway, it's a kind of lower tech approach to Elon's Hypertube, and since you're such an influential bunch, I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Where do you think we should have one?
Where should we have one?
I-5.
Bay Bridge.
Where do you live?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. Market Street. Unless you're going the wrong direction.
Have one suspended under the Bay Bridge, under the Richmond Bridge,
nice.
along the freeways.
Okay.
There's a lot of amazing ideas. I mean, I know in Europe, they do bicycle super highways. In the Netherlands, I'm sure everyone here knows about this. Is that possible in the Bay Area with our current sort of leadership?
I think it's more difficult, and for one reason. I think our regional leadership when it comes to transportation is there, but it's incredibly difficult with 9 counties, over 100 municipalities, to try to get all of these governments who want to protect their own interests to work together on something like a truly regional network of, like you said, a bike highway or a bike, connected bike paths around. And there are, I don't want to discount the efforts of the Bay Trail and Bay Area, folks, important groups that are working on that connectivity to build those pieces together. But London's a great example where you have kind of a really strong government, a metropolitan government that can plan with one voice to make that happen. And it's tough, and we're not giving up on that. I want to put a plug in for somebody mentioned the Bay Bridge, the eastern span of the Bay Bridge. Later this summer, stay tuned, some very exciting announcements on a finalized design for that path. And the next step is finding the funding for it. So the design is complete. It looks beautiful. I've seen the renderings. We're just going to need to fight like heck for the millions that it's going to take to build it.
So what happens, on the topic of the Richmond Bridge, what happens when there's a bike lane that's already approved and paid for, and now we want to take it away? Like, how does we act as a region to deal with that?
I want to almost cuss in my answer. Just go crazy.
Public shame.
Yeah, just go crazy, shaming the people who want to take that away. I mean, it's work with the MCBC, and we'll help with that. We don't do very much locally, but that spans counties, and it's a Caltrans bridge, so we'll help with that too.
Yeah, I can't speak to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, but I know our colleagues at Marin County Bicycle Coalition and Bike East Bay care deeply about that path and want to see it open, not just for part of the day, but all the time. And it would be a great connectivity, not just for recreational riders, although it would be really cool to bike across on your road bike. But I think, as somebody else brought up, with the advent of e-bikes for commuting as well.
I just
for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I heard that the delay in that path, there's some study about doing a part-time path is not likely to derail the plan from folks at MTC. I think that we have to stay vigilant, but I don't think we should be despondent.
Just wary.
It just seems to me like it's a timing issue because e-bikes are kind of just really becoming in the public consciousness, and that's why we got to get all those elected officials to be in the saddle. And that if it was in 2 years from now, I mean, it's a lot of what we faced with our transportation authority. Same thing, like we can't go through with the new measure. Now they have included GHG in their Measure A, which is great. So we want to see that go forward, but it's a timing issue that these things are. Can you delay it? Can you make it not permanent? Can you?
Yeah. It's interesting because of this controversy. We went down to MTC and had a meeting with the head of the MTC and did test rides of electric bikes with all of the commissioners.
Great.
Because the MTC actually, it's their project. They want it to succeed. The problem was they actually weren't working. This is my personal opinion. They weren't working hard enough to actually make sure it was a success. Because it would be silly if there's no mode shift. If you just open it up and there's no one riding it, you're going to look like a fool.
Yeah.
And it took a little bit of
If you build it, they will
work,
come. Yes.
sort of. But I think that's sort of true. But I think it's also, we have great infrastructure here at the ferry to get you back to San Rafael and to get you up to San Anselmo, and the ferry doesn't talk about it at all. There's no billboards in the ferry.
Well, let's talk about putting e-bikes on the ferry.
Yeah, there's that too. So there is a little bit of
There's some institutional barriers for e-bikes right now, and it's maybe it's ignorance, maybe it's risk assessors and lawyers, but we do need to tackle that.
And dare I say, let's talk about affordable housing in downtown San Rafael so that you attract the kinds of people who would rather not spend money on a car and use those paths.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
now we're getting big here.
Housing
We'll be here
is
for 5 hours.
Housing is the issue. I mean, that's
say that, Dave. Yes.
it's all it's so closely linked. We have a question from the audience.
Thank you for being here today. My question, since somebody just brought up law, is Are any of you aware of anyone having to defend a traffic ticket while riding an e-bike?
Yes. You're under California Vehicle Code. You're classified as a vehicle on the street, and the rules of the road apply to you. So, running a stop sign, failure to yield, you are susceptible to that, just like any other vehicle on the street. And yeah, people in San Francisco have gotten tickets on their bike. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, yeah. So I'm not as up on the different classes of e-bikes and what the speed limit regulations are on those, but 18 miles?
Well,
20 miles?
28 for a high-speed bike,
28,
but there are rules in the books, but I would say
so
most
speeding ticket, no.
Police officers don't know. Yeah. Me neither. Yeah.
Follow the speed limit and you'll be okay.
Yeah. That is an interesting topic, though. Brian, we've had a conversation about this. There's an institutional issue, and I think Jenna was alluding to that as well. There's an institutional issues exist, across the board. The infrastructure is an institutional issue. There's police enforcement or non-enforcement, which is a huge institutional issue, and it's people aren't wrong when they see. I know for a fact, and talking to lots of customers, people aren't wrong thinking that they're sort of second-class citizens when they get on a bicycle before the law, especially, and which makes them feel if you can make the choice and not be a second-class citizen, what do you choose in a way? If you need to stay safe and you need to, so there's some issues with this. We've had people where police don't even take their statement when they get in a crash and don't arrest the perpetrator. Or just assume a car driver is innocent. It happens in San Francisco all the time. They don't follow up on bikes that are getting stolen, even though it's grand theft on an e-bike. There's issues of just where to park your bike. There's a lot of institutional things. Are those topics on the mind? Because you can build the prettiest bike lane in the world, but if people feel like second-class citizens on it, or they feel like they don't have a place to park at the end of it, What's the thought on that?
We could have a whole separate panel about enforcement and the role of law enforcement in our communities and as it relates to biking. I will say that those two things are part of what gets behavior change, what's going to get us to Vision Zero. But I do want to elevate the infrastructure piece above that. Safety is number one, far and away. The engineering piece is where we focus. The majority of our energy. That's not to say we don't work with law enforcement and San Francisco Police Department in particular. I would say that relationship, if I could characterize it, has become more positive even over the last 2 or 3 years. And we're not seeing the type of sting operations we used to see where SFPD are sitting at the Wiggle, for instance, and writing a $300 ticket to every single person that doesn't put their foot down when they're at the stop sign. So we've seen a reduction in that kind of targeted behavior. That said, we do advocate for equal treatment under the law means equal responsibility under the law, and following the rules of the road. We're not advocating anybody break those rules, but there's a whole other host of issues that we can get into when we talk about enforcement and bias, and what it's like for different kinds of people that look different to be riding their bike, and what kind of privilege we all carry with us when we take those trips. But that's a separate panel, probably.
Our next panel.
Yeah.
I might just also add that I think this discussion of bicyclists being second-class citizens is an interesting point, because I'll just speak from MC's perspective. When we first got started, we were this crazy group of people. I say we, the royal we, right? But we were this crazy group of people up in Marin in the hippie zone that were wanting renewable energy. And it's taken a really long time for people to take this movement towards renewable energy seriously. And I don't think it can be understated enough how important it is to show up and show that there is a group of people that is committed to this, to bicycles, to having infrastructure, to seeing it as a mainstream part of how people choose to move around their community. And so people showing up and showing that it's an every person movement makes a difference, because if you're looking at it like, oh, well, it's just a small group of people who are riding bicycles, or whatever, if you can break it into all these different things, the elected officials don't necessarily see everything out there. And so having people show up and say, this is a movement, this is a group of people who want to participate, makes a really big difference in making those long-term changes.
We had that experience recently in Marin where they were talking about banning electric bikes, or putting language in there banning electric bikes on trails, or not trails, but on places that mountain bikes can ride, so fire roads and things like this. And so we had, I think, 70 people showed up. People in,
People in the audience here.
People in the audience here. People in, nice ties and slacks, and they were saying, this is a gateway to cycling. You don't want to discriminate against something that's, removing greenhouse gases. So it really does work. And this goes back to the point of constituency growing. When you have young and old, every single person showing up, you can't typecast people like that. All ages, all ethnicities, everything, you can't typecast it anymore. And then that's very powerful, because it's a people movement at that point. So it's a really good point. I think I think we've done really well here in the sun. How's everyone doing up here? Everyone's melting.
Yeah, we've got the shade over here. Sorry.
The shade is.
I want to thank all of our guests, and thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah.